a bit of a tricky angle, but we'll try and make it work. Cell membrane. Today, I want to talk about biology. I want to go through some of the stuff that I think is most important in biology, but I want to start out with some basics. So this is the intro to biology. Intro to biology. And of course, this is a glorious summer 2024. Oh, it's beautiful. It's wonderful. I'm glad to be here. You're glad to be here. One of the most important things in biology, you come against it again and again and again and again, and one of the most important vital aspects of life, period. One of the most important vital aspects of life, period, is what? It's the cell membrane. But I think in order to understand why the cell membrane is so important, you have to kind of put yourself into a cell's shoes and look inside of a cell and see what a cell is like. And in order to do that, you got to believe. You got to take a couple deep breaths. Yeah. Maybe even close your eyes and relax and envision yourself in the extracellular fluid floating. Gently floating. So what I want you to do is try and envision yourself entering a cell. Envision entering a cell. And in order to do that, maybe the easiest way to do that is to think of yourself first as just floating in this sort of fluid, this mostly water-based fluid, and then you start to see different molecules, different shapes, different machines off in the distance. Things start whizzing past you. You have these different shapes and structures all around you. You're like just hanging out, and then there's this stuff that's sort of bombarding you, zooming around you, and it's got different sizes and shapes. And as you look at it closer and closer, here it's hard to depict, but you see that this thing that looks, about the same size as you, in this case, it is actually much bigger than you. Yeah, it's actually off in the distance, and it's huge. So I'm not going to reveal exactly what sort of scale your own internal sight is here. I just want you to have the feeling of being in this intracellular, this extracellular space, and I want you to feel like you're alone there. Yeah. I want you to feel like you're surrounded by murk and by this sensation of just feverish activity around you. And you start to see shapes and things moving off in the distance and, zooming around. And all of a sudden you see like two things smash off against each other in the distance, and they just keep on flying around doing their own thing. Maybe you see two things zoom together and they like merge into this one crazy thing. All of a sudden you look off into the distance and you see that there's this there's this battle taking place between these huge cells. Compared to you, they're much larger, and they're just like blasting like sort of protrusions at each other, and they sort of like get closer and closer, and they sort of disappear into the murk, and it looks like they're trying to eat each other and tear one another apart. This is the cellular life. This is the extracellular space. This is what I want you to sort of be aware of. This isn't just happening in a puddle of water, in a drop of water, though it is. It's also happening inside of you, on crazy scales. And in fact, when we're dealing with large multicellular organisms like us, we tend to think of ourselves as just single entities, as big things. But in fact, we're this crazy living hive, this interweaving, woven, mad, loony mess of all these different particles and chemicals and chemistries and interactions. And it's only that combination that we really get to start to study in biology. So the one thing I want you to start adding into your extracellular space that maybe you didn't have before is you start to look around and you realize that beside you, there is a huge wall, right? This expanse, right? And this massive expanse is some cellular membrane, though you might not actually know that yet, and you're quite far away from it still, but you can make out that it is definitely not like flat and even as you might hope and expect. In fact, it's covered in all sorts of crazy little pieces and shapes. In fact, it kind of looks like trees. It's like this own sort of little landscape all unto and of itself. And you can't see, of course, through the cell membrane, but you can see that there's like openings and spaces where things are zooming in and out and moving in between. And there's this constant flow of particles and activity and the like just constantly moving around and being placed inside. And you have almost little creature-like shapes and little machine-like sort of entities writhing on the surface and bringing things towards it. It's all... The cellular world is very random and peculiar and alien and insect-like in all sorts of ways. This is what's inside of you. This is the sort of basic structures that keep you going, but they're incredibly random and unpredictable. And that's the sort of alienness that I want you to try and get an idea of, to sort of focus on here. So here you are, you're approaching this cell membrane and you're dropping towards it. And as, of course, you get closer and closer towards it, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it fills your vision. And you can see, again, more and more detail and shape and structure out there. And you can see that there are these like different shapes, and there's these different sort of, patterns on the surface, and things are sticking out and being moved through, and there's again you start to get an idea of like actual topology, and it's like looking down at a massive city, hives of activity at particular places and locations with crazy sort of moving structures and shapes, and then other places where it's just expanse, where it's massive and there's no real sort of sense of structure or shape at all. And as you drop closer and closer onto the surface, you start to lose the sense of scale again, because it's so big, and things are blocking your view, and you start to enter into this plane where you're just sort of there, and you get to see off in the distance these large shapes, these large structures, and these forms and whatever, but they're blocking everything else that you were previously aware of. You just have the sensation of machines, of creatures, of things sort of writhing and moving and doing their thing off in the individual distance. The very membrane that you're on, of course, is not solid, is not stable, and things can in any moment erupt out of it and emerge and then fly off and mind their own business. And you are not in a stable world, and that's kind of one of the most important and wonderful things about this level of biology as you get closer and closer into things. So now that you've actually stood down upon this weird surface, you're confronted with this kind of bubbly structure that you feel like you're standing on. It moves and it rides and it's got its own shapes and functions, but it's relatively stable in the particular location that you're at. You can't see much past it, but all of a sudden you look beside you and you see that there's some sort of crazy structure occurring. There's something weird going on, and the piece that you're standing on is actually starting to open up. There's some sort of twisting shape or channel emerging from it. I'm starting to depict here, and some new sort of shape or structure or molecule starts to move into the membrane. As that happens, you somehow get to see through some of these shifting chemicals and molecules. Maybe they open up a little bit of space for your strange miraculous vision to spot, and you get to see the shape of this membrane protein, this crazy sort of protein structure, as it moves some particle through it and eventually emits it into the other side of the cell. For you, this gives you the basic idea, of course, that it's possible to transit the cell, that it's possible to actually end up inside. Now, this structure that we've been dealing with is, of course, incredibly important. It's called the phospholipid bilayer. It has an important chemical structure. The synthesis of chemistry and biology is really apparent at this sort of level. We're dealing with individual chemical structures that we're actually going to be able to describe in good detail, but we're also dealing with sort of recognizably biological and machine-like processes. At the same time, it's really important that we keep an idea of the basic sort of chemical randomness and spontaneity and entropy that rules at this sort of level, at this sort of layer. It's crazy that we have these sort of functions and structures. We have function and structure here, but you have to simultaneously keep in mind just the pure randomness of nature at this sort of scale. Simultaneously keep in mind the randomness of nature. So that's it for our first intro to biology, and we're going to continue to exploring these sort of subjects and concepts and see where they take us and how deep and far the rabbit hole goes. Have a great day, and we'll see you again.